Policy organization, and we've been distributing voter guides over 20 years to churches all across the state, nonpartisan, surveying candidates on key issues and publishing the results in the educational voter guide. Also conducting voter registration in thousands of churches across the state over the last couple of decades. So our people are involved in both, in fact, work at the local polls, they work on election day, they're volunteers, and we were receiving a lot of reports this year of irregularities in the early voting, suspicious activity, more than normal. In times past, I had not been a believer and adherent that there was widespread voter fraud in Ohio, but things have changed over the last 10 years because we have seen an evolution of our election laws expand. And so you had Help America Vote Act with a provisional ballot. And so you had this going on, and you had 35 days of open voting. But I wanted to read to you the statement that we put out 6 days after the November 6th election. Reports are surfacing from eyewitness testimony of our volunteers, poll workers, poll observers, and election officials detailing a story of widespread voter fraud and in some instances election fraud. The Ohio Christian Alliance, working in cooperation with other nonprofit organizations and a pool of volunteer researchers, will be conducting a detailed investigation of these reports in the coming weeks. We will report to the media, the Ohio Legislature, the Ohio Secretary of State's office, and the Attorney General's office, the state of Ohio, for possible prosecution of violators of election laws in response to our findings. The fact is that 35 days of open voting, including Golden Week, court-ordered voting, mail-in voting, and provisional voting, has lent itself to an atmosphere inviting voter fraud. After putting out that release, I received a call from Secretary of State John Husted, and he said, "Chris, what's up?" I said, "John, we're getting a lot of reports, and we're going to track them down. It's just too serious." And not only that, our folks are really getting discouraged. I've never heard them give these kinds of expressions before, like, what good is it? They're just going to steal the election. Our folks never talked like that before. So, we needed to do something. So we started collecting. He said, "Well, I'm going to need sworn statements. I'm going to need affidavits." I said, "You'll get them." And so we're not talking about hearsay or, a chain letter, as he referred to in one of his statements. We're talking about real testimony of people that work the polls on election day. Well, it's very simple to do that. Many of you work the polls. You'll write notes, and those are called poll worker notes. And any kind of irregularity, a problem with a voting machine, a provisional ballot, something called a fleeing voter. Anybody ever heard of that before? It's not really a talking point. This is what's interesting to me. Yet, in boards of election all over the state, people are referring to fleeing voter. So we're tracking down what that might mean, and we've got some great indication. Also, problems with the provisional ballots, people coming in because you can't turn anyone away at the polls. If they don't have proper identification, you're still to grant them a provisional ballot. There are two basic voting machines in the state of Ohio broken up among the 88 counties. One is the optical scan. How many have optical scan in your county? All right. How many of you have touch screen? You have touch screen in your county. Well, the majority here have touch screen. Well, the problem with touch screen monitoring is that it's like your cell phone. After a while, that technology just only has so much of a shelf life. It starts wigging out. It doesn't work. And those machines are over 10 years old now. So when we heard the reports, even nationally, that people in Ohio voting early were pressing for one candidate and another candidate kept coming up. Now, we had a lady, 84 years of age, in Guernsey County. She's not on the internet and she doesn't have email, but she heard the radio program, so she phoned in. And she said, "I want to tell you what happened to me on election day. I went in to vote for each one of my candidates on my list, and each time I pressed my candidate, the opposite candidate came up, all the way down the ticket." She said, "I went to the poll worker and said, 'Hey, I'm having this kind of problem.' She said, 'Oh, we've been having trouble with that machine all day.'" Well, the Secretary of State and the Board of Elections, obviously they put a lot of work in what they do, and we put confidence in them. But every once in a while, it's important for us, we the people, to do an independent citizens audit, so that's what we're doing. Well, I know getting into this kind of project, it's like going into a vortex that's never ending. It's kind of like one of those things with the well that you drop a pebble and you can't hear the bottom. That's kind of like what this is. So when I said in the weeks coming, those weeks turned into months. And we wanted to launch in September, but I can tell you that we will have a press conference here at the State House sometime in the next 10 days, releasing the findings of our citizens audit. Now, we've been waiting for sworn statements, people to write down and tell us what their story was. And we've got a lot of problem out there in the state of Ohio, as you were aware and you assumed, and it exists. And we've got to fix it. You say, well, and here's another problem we had. The further you get away from November election, people move on to other issues. And but yet, folks, 2016 will be here. We don't fix this now, we're going to be in the same problem then as we are now. Does anyone want to face that scenario? I don't. You're all aware of that college voting, where these kids are registering their dormitory, right? And they're using that. Well, we did a little research on that, and we started into a few colleges. Here's one at Ashland University. It's predominantly, I think, a conservative university. It's where the Ashbrook Center is. My daughter attends there. But still, the Obama campaign was working heavily at Ashland University. We have a sworn statement from my daughter's roommate, who happens to be a registered Democrat in the state of New York. And she was approached by an Obama campaign worker. And by the way, I heard somebody talk about that data mining. How is it they didn't approach my daughter in September, but they approached her roommate? Interesting, huh? That's pretty good technology to know how to do that. Know whose political leanings are what. And they said, are you registered to vote? And Holly said, yes, I'm registered to vote in the state of New York, in which I reside, and I've already applied for an application for absentee ballot. Then the paid Obama campaign worker said, oh, but you can register and vote right here in Ohio. Now, what's wrong with that scenario? Plenty. That's inviting that young person without suggestion to commit a 4th-degree felony, not just voting back home, but voting in the battleground state of Ohio. She went on to tell her, we don't need your vote in New York. We need it right here in the battleground state of Ohio. Well, let me just tell you the numbers here. This is one state college, okay? In Amstutz Hall, there was 68 students using that residence hall for their place where they would vote, 68. Clayton Hall, 22. Clark Hall, 46. Andrews, 13. Bixler, 13. Kem, 34. Jacobs, 17. A total of 213 registrants who could have registered someplace else back home, but no, they were using that. Some of them out-of-state students, some of them in-state. Let me just tell you a little story of the volunteer that's working and doing a lot of research for us there in that county. She has found testimony of students that realized after they registered and said, wait, I'm registered back home. And they really felt pressured into it. They went to the Board of Elections and said, I don't want to register here. Smart kid. Realizing that double registration, you know, the inference there, double voting, I'm voting back home. So what happened there? Well, you had a pressure of an Obama campaign worker pushing these kids. Well, the citizens audit, although we're going to report our findings in the next 10 days, we're going to continue our audit. In fact, we could use volunteers right here in this room. Stop and see me at the booth back there. Because there's a way to kind of do some cross-referencing that we might want to find out, in fact, if some of these kids not only voted in Ohio, but if they voted back home too. So come and see me, all right?